Good afternoon, everyone. It is a privilege for FAME to provide you these webinars as COVID-19 has truly impacted us all in ways we couldn't have imagined or foreseen. FAME is here with you during these times, and we're here for you. We're here to keep you functioning as well as compliant. We're just going to cover a few housekeeping tips. Google Chrome is the preferred browser in order for you to access today's webinar. Once you have selected an audio feature or audio platform, you're going to want to click on the upper right-hand corner to click on that sound check to ensure that you will have no difficulties. If you're still experiencing difficulties, we recommend you leave the webinar and rejoin. And you're going to also want to ensure that right now you make sure if you've not refreshed your browser, you can always click on F5 and you want to close your pop-up blocker. Now, the handouts today can be accessed underneath materials or handouts, and we will accept our questions at the end of today's webinar underneath the chat feature. Now, our presenters today, Sally Samuels is one of the country's leading authorities in federal financial aid. She has more than 39 years of in the trenches experience and serves as our Director of Compliance here at FAME. Nicole Figueredo is our Senior Client Support Specialist with 25 years of experience in financial aid and provides exceptional support and guidance in administering financial aid. Nicole is a subject matter expert in FAME's platform suite, AppFam, FinAid, and Freedom. And with that being said, I am going to give it over to Sally. Hi, Sally.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Joe, for that great introduction. This is just an overview of what we're covering today, and I'm not going to read it to you. We'll cover everything that's on here. Just note that toward the end, Nicole is going to cover some freedom-only issues because a lot of our client base does use that software, and there are some new things coming out to help the schools deal with the COVID virus situation. Oops, it went too far. Okay, so this is just a statement from the April 3rd OP updated guidance for interruptions of study due to the coronavirus, which is COVID-19. One of the things I want to point out is that normally everything as far as regulations and statutory requirements out there all are subject to following those rules. This is something that's certainly unusual. We've never had any type of a natural disaster declared basically throughout the whole United States. We do not have one single state not affected by COVID-19. We do have some areas that may not be affected within the state. But as far as the overall declaring a national emergency concerning the coronavirus outbreak, it was proclaimed in the Federal Register. And basically, this means that this is unprecedented information, things that we have to actually wait for the department to figure out how they're going to make some of this work. Because as you know, through the CARES Act, there was all types of things in there that go against regulations and statutory requirements. At this point, the Department of Education is trying very hard to figure out how they're going to implement everything that's required in that stimulus act. And it's not an easy job. There are a lot of things out there that they don't have any idea how to handle. So whatever information I try to give you today and the information we've given you in the past is based on our best guidance at this point. And some of the things we say might change a little bit. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do with the refund situation, and they're not exactly sure how they're going to handle it. But we'll address these issues kind of as we go through here a little bit. I do not know what that noise is, but and I can't, oh, there we go. I wasn't able to change the screen in the beginning. Okay, so Ed did give us some guidance on 3.5.20. That was the first guidance we received from the Department of Education. We've talked about some of these things before. They had 5 different scenarios related to COVID-19. I'm really not going to talk about the first one because most of our students do not travel and attend schools abroad as part of their education experience. We'll talk a little bit about the full-time and clinical enrollments, student quarantine, the campus-based temporary stops, offering ground-based classes, which is probably the biggest situation that we're dealing with, and the foreign school that serves U.S. students, but we don't have many of those either. So the second example there talked about the full-time enrollment, and then students go to clinicals, internships, etc., and all of a sudden those aren't available. I actually had a friend in the hospital when the little student nurses there said, oh, we're not sure we're going to be here tomorrow, the next day, because we don't know what's going on. We may have to cancel our clinical sites. And that's exactly what happened. So what's going to happen now is you have students that either have to go to another semester without doing the clinicals, or some of the schools are even starting a semester that overlaps the other one for a mini semester, which would normally be clinicals, etc. It seems like the Department of Education is approving a lot of these little extra things that you can do because they want these students to stay involved, and obviously they can't go to the clinical site. Those students may not be full-time anymore, but if they attended what they were supposed to attend, and at the point that the loans were certified and dispersed, it doesn't matter if they're less than full-time now. It doesn't matter if they're less than half-time now for the rest of that payment period. It was what the status was in the beginning when the loans were certified. So those students could have to go on a leave of absence, which is going to be acceptable because of this unusual situation. They might have a problem if they get to the next term and they're not at least half-time at the start of the next term. They might still get those loans, but not at the beginning. Remember, the student has to be at least half-time to have any loan disbursements. So if they start the next payment period and they're less than half-time, then they would not be eligible for loans at that point. They might still be eligible for the full loan. You might be able to go back and award all of the loan for the first payment period. If you don't know how to handle some of that, you can contact us. Customer service can help you. As I mentioned, the students might have to go on to a leave of absence until the facilities reopen. You can extend terms or payment periods. You can have overlapping terms for a short period of time during this scenario. The example 3, students quarantined, misses classes, incapacitated, family members are incapacitated, whatever, through this COVID-19. There's a lot of flexibility with leave of absences. The student can notify you in writing. It doesn't have to be a formal leave to notify you for you to accept the leave, but then you would have to send something out to have them verify that, yes, they want the leave of absence. You're going to have to put some type of an end date on it. You can always allow the student to come back early. So if you're not sure how long they need the leave for, you can still do a leave of absence up to 180 days. If a student is already on a leave of absence, you cannot exceed the 180-day time frame in 12 months. That is something that they have not even addressed, or there's not been any changes out there as far as I know. So if you have a student already on a leave, remember that 180 days within a 12-month period still is in effect. Some reasons that they might want to take an LOA: no clinical site available, childcare is closed and they don't have anybody watch the babies and they can't actually do an online program at that point because the children are too disruptive, illness of the student, a family member, they don't have the technology, they don't know how to do, and that TDE is temporary distance education. So you can accept a leave of absence for almost any reason. Remember, you just can't accept an email saying they want to leave. They have to formally say that they want to leave, and they have to wet sign it, which means it can be an electronic signature, it can be a signature through a portal, it can be a signature through the FAME app, but it does have to actually have a signature on the form. If you don't have the form up front, that's okay. They're saying you can go back and get it later, but please remember to follow up. Otherwise, those leave of absences might be decided that they're not valid, so you don't want that to happen. The next example was the campus is temporarily stopped offering your ground line classes, and now you have to scramble and do something else. You need to notify ED, your state authorization, and your accrediting agency that you've temporarily either closed or ceased your on-ground campus, and you plan to reopen it when it's safe for students and the staff. If you've been able to go ahead before you had to close and get your approvals for temporary distance education, then that's good. You can just notify them that you're going to go ahead and do the temporary distance education. All the accrediting agencies have an app online you can do. You then go ahead and get your state approval first, your accrediting agency next, and then you go ahead and offer those classes. Whoever is making that noise, please go on mute. I think Joe's trying to mute everybody, but apparently we still have an issue.
Sorry about that, Sally. It looks like GoToWebinar is having some audio difficulty. I apologize about that.
That's okay. I understand. GoToWebinar, Google Classrooms, everything, Zoom, everything out there is having an issue because it's overused right now. But thank you for the explanation, Joe. So you do not have to notify ED that you are teaching temporary distance education, but it is a courtesy, and they've said they don't need to approve it, but you should still notify. Remember, almost anything that you change requires a email or something to ED to just let them know what's going on. And if you're not going to go ahead and do education, please make sure that you notify them that the time frame is temporary and that you do plan to go back, and give them phone numbers so the Department of Ed knows how to reach you if you're not at the school and the school is closed, because you don't want them to cut off your funding permanently, obviously. Okay. So the approvals to offer distance education, again, Department of Ed provided you with a very broad approval of use of technologies. They gave the accreditors a lot of flexibility on what you have to do for distance education. They don't require the normal reviews to accommodate students. Most of them are working very hard with the schools and the accrediting agencies to make sure that, and the state, to make sure that your students can get paid. The temporary
unmuted
education only applies to the current payment period and then the next one after that. So if you had a student that was a clock hour student and they were at 400 hours when you temporarily closed and then you reopened and you did distance education for that student, they would only have 50 hours left in the current payment period and they would have the next payment period. Now, that information could change in the future. That was the best information that we have right now. And I know a lot of the schools are very limited in how much actual distance education time they can put in because of state requirements. Remember, you have to follow those state requirements. You are allowed to start new students that will be enrolled in starting class up to June 1st, 2020. That was in the 320 guidance. And for your clock hour programs, remember, you still have the 50 to 60 minute clock hour that you have to be able to justify somehow, whether it's whatever platforms you're currently using, if there's a way for them to still log in and out of some of those platforms. I know there are. Remember, your state licensing really is important in this because some states are limited to a very minimal number of hours that you can do. If you have any type of practical applications, some states aren't allowing you to do any practical online. And remember, the instructors must initiate substantive communication with students. There is a lot of flexibility here, but you can't just give the student assignment and never have contact with them again. You have to do something interactive. So if you have a lecture, be sure there's a time frame they can ask questions and participate there. If they're logging in and doing some type of a project, a chapter, maybe you initiate a test they take at the end so that that's an initiation of instructor interface with the students. They send back the results and you grade that. You send the grades back. You allow some type of chat. You allow some type of a go-to-meeting so that if they have questions about something, they can do it. I don't think there's any requirement that you have to have contact every single hour. The Department of Ed is being very, very flexible here. You just need to be sure that there is ongoing, more than once a day, probably some type of communication with those students. You may have students that don't participate. You may have students that don't respond, but at least the instructor's initiating something. So the work study is something that is out there that is really, again, unprecedented as far as I know. If the student's in a current payment period and the student cannot go out and work wherever they were working, or they can't work at the school because the school is closed, and they had scheduled hours to work for this current payment period, and it's reflected and part of the COVID-19 crisis, then the student could continue to get paid for the number of hours that they were scheduled to work. If they didn't have a schedule already and they weren't already working, that's not going to apply to you. It's only if the student was currently working. You document that the COVID-19 was disruption and was the reason that the federal work study funds dispersed without documentation of hours worked. This will also happen if you had them working out there in public service and they can't now do the public service, community service, or whatever. My understanding is 100% of the funds can be transferred to FSEOG, and the requirement of the 7% community service and the requirement for the One Project in America Reads can be waived. But there is a deadline for that in April. I think it's April 20th. But you can go in and recheck that. You must currently apply for a waiver. We have not seen anything from Ed saying that that's something automatically you can do without the waiver. So again, look for something in the future. Maybe we will get something from Department of Ed once they have a chance to write up some of the questions that have gone in. And I just do want to remind you, if you're sending any questions about COVID-19, you have a small group of federal people working on these different areas. You've got the whole financial aspect. You've got the whole R2T4 stuff, standard terms, satisfactory progress, all of those things. And this is another one where, you know, it says under statute what has to be used when. And unless you apply for a waiver, you don't get the waiver. But again, under the Stimulus Act and the National Emergency, it said that you might not have to get waivers. So at this point, that is still up in the air and we're not sure what's going on with it. We do know the matching funds are supposed to be waived. And then the institution, again, it says must request the waiver from Ed. Until we have further notice, that still, as far as I know, is a requirement. Some additional topics: length of academic year. Ed does authorize institutions to request a temporary reduction in your academic year. So if you currently have a 32-week academic year and you have two 16-week terms, and you already completed one 16-week semester, and then the next semester, which was in January, ended 4 weeks early. So now you end up only 4 weeks short of that 32-week academic year. You could ask the Department of Education to request a temporary reduction of the academic year for that one particular semester. You do have to email the school participation team for approval, and that will be on a case-by-case basis. If you have some way, like you just closed for a couple of weeks and you're able to reopen, I mean, at this point, I think most of us have been closed 3 or 4 weeks. Some of you have been closed longer than that. And I know in Florida, they're saying that we're doing social distancing at least till April 30th. So I'm sure every state has its own limitations right now. So again, we're waiting to see what's going to happen with that academic year definition, whether you're still going to have to ask for the approval. I don't think that one's going to change. I think if you're going to go in there and ask for a temporary reduction, you're going to have to contact the school participation group and you won't have any choice. Professional judgment, again, there's a lot of flexibility here to use professional judgment to make adjustments on a case-by-case basis. You cannot say you're going to take every student in the school and do professional judgment on them because of COVID-19. You can do professional judgment on every single student, but every single student has to be individually, case-by-case adjustment made based on their personal situations and whatever documentation you can get to support that. You can make adjustments to the cost of attendance, and you can also make adjustments to the student or parent loss of income, or, childcare, obviously, because now there's no childcare involved, and there's several other things in there that you can adjust, but those are the two most common things that are done. Your enrollment status, just so you remember, enrollment status doesn't change. Full-time is still at least 12 credits. And I didn't put it in here, but for clock hour, full-time is at least 24 hours a week. Part-time or half-time is at least 6 credits. And for clock hour, it's at least 12 hours a week. And that's important when you get to that second payment period. If the student's less than half-time, they're less than half-time for credit hour, 6 hours, they're not going to be eligible for loans. They'll only be eligible for the Pell at less than half-time. If they're less than half-time for the clock hour schools, you actually aren't going to be eligible for Pell or loans unless sometime during that payment period, the whole status changes. So you might want to think about writing a policy to say that, like, for that one payment period, if the student can add credits or can increase their clock hours before the end of the payment period, you would do so, and it might make them eligible. It's going to be a little tricky. I know there's a couple of states out there for cosmetology that are saying that you can only do 10 hours of distance education online. So you're okay for the current payment period, but not for the next one. So again, they have to be at least half-time when loan certified, and you only have to recalculate Pell if the student doesn't attempt all the courses from the original start date. So maybe I taught in modules and I taught 4 modules, 3 credits per module. So that made up my 12 credits. And my student only attempted module 1 before the school had to go to less than full-time because they're online, or they were closed for a little bit of time, and by the time they reopened, the student could only take, maybe 1 more module or whatever. So you only have to recalculate Pell if the student doesn't attempt all. So if you reopened and they ended up taking 6 credits instead of 12 credits, you would have to still recalculate Pell and return whatever they didn't start. If they start all the classes at the beginning of the term, that would not be an issue. Return of Title IV. Okay, this is one of those ones that we're still waiting for Ed to give us information. And I know some of you have written to the department, maybe not through the COVID-19 or possibly through the COVID-19, and gotten a different answer than what I'm going to talk about right now. I'm going to talk about the fact that the stimulus bill was passed by Congress. And Congress says that schools don't have to return the RTT4 money, or the students don't have to return the RTT4 money if it was a result of the student withdrawing because of COVID-19. The problem is Department of Ed doesn't know what to do with this yet. They're working on it. So right now, the standard answer is basically that it's statutory and you have to make refunds. And I have had schools get that answer and send it on to me. So I'm just going to again say, once Congress passes something, the Department of Ed has to figure out how to make it work. And we might not like the way it's going to work, but they're going to figure it out. So let's just talk about withdrawal date. If you cease operation and you can't reopen by the end of the payment period, the student's going to be a drop. You're going to have to do the RTT4 calculation. If the institution closes or reopens during the payment period and the student did not come back and did not go on a leave, then that student is also a drop. If you're required to take attendance and you don't reopen, the withdrawal date is going to be the last date of documented attendance, which is going to be when you closed. And then, of course, the date of determination is going to be 14 days after that. If you don't have to take attendance and the student just stopped coming, you would use your normal method to determine the student withdrew. That's also same for up above in the attendance taking. The student actually was attending right along. And then even after maybe you went to temporary distance education, they were attending and they stopped attending, then your normal clock starts just like it always would. So now you know withdrawal dates, your date of determination and timeframes for returns. Your date of determination is always what it's been. In the case that the institution closes, it's the date of closure, unless it was required to take attendance and the student stopped attending before that. The RTT4 calculations due within 30 days, just like it's always been. That means you have to do the calculation. Refunds are not due per the stimulus package, only if the drop was due to COVID-19. We are still waiting for guidance from Ed. So what you should do, this is just me talking, my personal opinion, and the opinion of some of the other people that I've talked to, is that you go ahead and you do your RTT4. You do not return the money. And we wait to see what they tell us. I'm sure if your return is late, because they say after all this, somehow or another, that you have to return that money, that because of the COVID-19 and you've documented it and you've documented what the stimulus bill says, that there's going to be some flexibility out there. And then again, if the student reenters in the same payment period, then you don't have to refund the money. The students due any money that would have been refunded through the other procedures. I think I skipped one, sorry. I'm using this mouse and the mouse is not cooperating.
Actually, Sally, it looks like we had a couple of people ask about slide number 16.
Did I miss that one?
I think you did.
Thank you, Joe. I can't tell because it's not allowing me to use my mouse.
Okay, okay.
I mean, it's not allowed me to use the up and down, only the mouse. So if it goes through, okay, thank you. Satisfactory academic progress. Right now, they're saying institutions can waive the quantitative measurement of SAP, which was also in the guidance the Department of Ed put out, but the stimulus bill did mention that you wouldn't count the credits that were not completed due to COVID-19. Again, we don't have any real guidance on how you do calculate SAP progress. Are you going to ignore that payment period? Are you going to use grades that you had at the time you closed if you didn't reopen? We don't know anything much about that. You still have the illness or family member due to COVID-19 that you would normally either, if the student was toward their end, you'd have to request some type of a waiver because of that and do an appeal. They're saying that if the student was ill or family member was ill, you would not have to appeal your SAP progress if the student was, having difficulty in not passing. So again, that's one of those ones Department of Education is going to have to work on and identify exactly what we're going to do and probably give us some examples. Students who didn't begin attendance, this was a strange one. I know some of you draw money in advance, and this mostly affects students that are attending foreign institutions and stuff like that. They sometimes receive the direct loan monies themselves to cover housing or whatever. And because of the COVID-19 related school closure, the Department of Ed is saying that they're not required to return those funds dispersed to them, and they're not going to be reported to NSLDS as a no-show, and not required to enter repayment 6 months later. So again, that's something I don't have any idea how they're going to handle. I don't think they have any idea how they're handling anything related to COVID-19 with COD or with NSLDS. That's why they're saying, unless the student's really withdrawn, you're just leaving their status as what it was before. So it's a strange situation out there that we're trying to deal with. Okay, this is a stimulus act, and they're saying the secretary may waive institutional requirement to grants and loans to be returned if the student withdraws as a result of a qualifying emergency. And then they have this definition of a qualifying emergency, and all those little numbers are in there because they were just in there. I just photocopied this and put it in here. I think they might be referring to the different page numbers in different sections, but it's basically saying that COVID-19 related anything is a qualifying emergency. So almost everything that we're talking about, or everything we're talking about, is a qualifying emergency, and this is a national emergency. So this is the president declared a major disaster 19 or an emergency under section 401 or 405 respectively of the Robert T. Stafford Disaster 21 Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. So basically, between the first section, the public health emergency related to 13, and then this section here, everything is basically a national emergency with a qualifying emergency that relieves us from doing a lot of things. And again, it's just a matter of the Department of Ed figuring out how they're going to do it. So this has to do with the temporary relief for the loan borrowers. Secretary will suspend all Title IV loan payments due for 3 months, Part D and Part B, which is both FFEL and direct loan, and it all loans do include the plus loans, which we were not sure about before. There's no accrual of loan interest for that period of suspension. And the loan forgiveness for each month of suspension will be treated as if the payment was made. So if somebody's in the loan forgiveness program and they didn't have to make payments, it's going to be recorded just like they made a payment. Reporting to the consumer reporting agencies, they'll treat all loans as being in regular repayment. And they're suspending all involuntary collections. So like if a student had a refund check coming from their taxes, they are not going to take that money. If somebody has a current situation where they're pulling money out of their paycheck on a monthly base, that is not going to happen if they're fortunate enough to still get a paycheck during this period of time. And it also temporarily waives notification to borrowers, but effective August 1st, 2020, it will reestablish all the notifications that have to go out to borrowers. So that's a lot of things going on for the students. Also in the Stimulus Act, the institutional refunds and federal stone flexibility, the R2T4 requires institutions using a waiver. So again, we don't know. Are schools going to have to ask for a waiver? Is the Department of Ed going to just automatically issue waivers, which I think is going to happen? To report the number of recipients, grant and loan assistance the institution didn't return. So they're going to do something with that. I'm not sure what. I know it's going to be used to some degree to figure out lifetime learning for Pell, and to again give students some SULA eligibility that may have been for one of these periods that the student withdrew in. I think they want it also so that they know how much money they really lost during this period. And another thing that could happen, I think it's a slight possibility that they might determine that the money you should have returned is excess cash and you have to use it for other students. But I do not know if that's even possible, one of their thoughts. I heard a rumor of that, and it was a slight rumor. So we don't know what's going to happen. Stay tuned, and we have to wait and see. But I wouldn't go out and spend that money right away if you didn't have to. Also, the institution can provide a student with an approved LOA, and it does not require the student to return at the same point in the program that they were in that semester. So that's really unusual. So like if the school had to temporarily close or whatever the situation was, the student had a family member that was sick and had to self-quarantine for 30 days. And the school was still open because they were in an area that the virus has not caused the whole school system to close down. Then, or they just weren't able to get online for 30 days, whatever it is, and they can come back within the same semester. They can pick up and make up whatever time they missed in work, not physical time, but in work, and still be able to do a loan and return within that semester, even though they're not coming back at the same point that they left. That's always been a big problem with the term-based leave of absence, is that you couldn't do it unless you had modules where the student could, complete a mod and then come back in a different mod type thing. So this is about the National Emergency Educational Waivers. And again, it says the secretary may waive any statutory or regulatory provision if they determine that such a waiver is necessary and appropriate due to the emergency involving federal primary responsibility determined to exist by the president. And then it says streamline waivers. So they can do an expedited application process, and they can also just waive the requirement. So we have to wait and see what's going to happen. But it looks like, I think based on this, that they're going to just automatically give some waivers for some of this, but I'm not sure which parts. And we have to wait and see. And you have to remember one other thing. When Department of Education gets together and tries to do something, they can probably get it done in a day or two because those people are pretty efficient when they want to be. The problem is everything has to go to OMB for clearance. And unfortunately, OMB is not as fast as our Department of Education is. So they could get it done in 2 days and it could sit in OMB for 5. We're hoping that doesn't happen. But meanwhile, they can't actually give you any new guidance unless OMB has cleared it. So I have about 9 questions into the COVID-19 website for Ed and have not received any answers. I did receive a response that they were looking at it, but mine all have to do with things like refunds and some of the harder stuff. Julie's gotten a couple of answers. Hers were more general, like overlapping terms and things. So they are responding. At least you get a notice that your question is there and they're looking at it. And unfortunately, the same people that are responding to the COVID-19 are the people responsible for getting us some of this other direction as far as refunds. So we have to be patient and just wait. And as I said, I think if you do something and a refund turns out late, I don't think we're going to be hit with it. If that happens, we'll just have to respond at that time. So again, re-entering the same payment period, I already touched on this, so that the students can come back in and take classwork and whatever they have to do to continue, and that they if the closure exceeds 5 days, remember this is how you calculate the return to Title IV. You're looking at what period were they actually in school. So if the closure exceeds 5 days, they're excluded. If the days are added, they're included. So your payment periods could end up, instead of being the normal 15 weeks, they can end up being 18 weeks or 20 weeks because you closed for a couple of weeks. And then when you closed, remember when you do your R2T4, you're looking at that time that you did not have class as the numerator and the denominator. It gets subtracted out of both of those, so that it turns out that your payment period is really pretty close to what it was originally for term-based. Clock hour, you're talking of scheduled hours, and I do want to remind you that if you don't change your schedule, it's going to look like your students aren't making progress and aren't going to get to their time frame as they should. And if you go to a second payment period and that student's less than 12 hours a week, you do have to have that schedule in there, or we will pay students incorrectly, because you cannot pay them if they're less than half time, unless somewhere along the line we get some new guidance on that. And I don't think that's going to happen because they did say enrollment status stays the way it was. NSLDS enrollment reporting. The exception to reporting NSLDS drops if the school closes and has reasonable expectations that you're going to reopen within 90 days. So I do have 3 or 4 schools that actually have closed and they have not done temporary distance online. They do not have to report those drops if they expect to reopen in 90 days. And then once they reopen, if the student resumes attendance, then those students are not considered a drop. So they would just report to NSLDS that those students are still currently active unless they know otherwise. So there's really a lot of strange things out there that we just never have had to deal with. Additional stimulus benefits, adjustment of subsidized loan usage limits, excludes from SULA any period of enrollment not completed due to COVID-19, and also from the Pell Grant maximum duration of 6 years. So it excludes any payment period of enrollment with the maximum Pell eligibility duration. Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. Maybe I'll start with the bad news first. You see here the amount that's supposed to go to each institution. 90% of this whole amount was supposed to go to higher education. 75%, according to the number of full-time Pell Grant eligible students at your school that weren't strictly enrolled in distance education courses prior to the COVID-19 crisis, and 25% to full-time non-Pell students. I don't know what's going to happen if you only have half-time students or less than full-time students, because they're taking this information from iPads. And you do report on there what happens. So 50% directly to schools for the use of costs of delivery of instruction and all the changes you've had to make to switch over from on ground to get your students up and running, temporary distance ed. And 50% directly to the students to cover educational costs, expenses, food, housing, materials, technology, healthcare, childcare. So I don't know if anybody's seen anything from your groups out there. I know ACTS put something out there, C-SPAN, XQ, they've all put something out there that our great friends, the Democrats, with Elizabeth Warren and Dick Durbin, have now sent forth a letter to Betsy DeVos, who's in charge of distributing this money, indicating that the for-profit schools don't meet the strict definition of higher education and that we should not get any of those funds, or our funds should be restricted to only certain types of use. So don't kill the messenger. Go back to your groups. You can read something on it. FAME will probably post something before the day's over on it. But hopefully, I mean, Betsy seems to be in our court most of the time. So hopefully, and maybe Congress will step up and say, hey, you can't do this. But those are senators from our Congress, unfortunately, that have kind of put a little kink in our thing. OPE updated guidance on verification. So be sure you document. V4, V5s. If they have an expired ID dated after March 1st, 2020, it is acceptable just during this period. As soon as we're up and running on your campus again, make sure you go back to your old verification ways. Copies of documents received for verification do not have to be notarized or submitted in person for V4, V5. So the student can take a picture of themselves and send it to them. That's a picture of them because driver's license or whatever could be expired. They can send all their documents emailed. If they email it, it should be password protected as an attachment. They can mail you the stuff, hard copy mail. They can submit it through a mobile app or a student portal that the school might have. Verification for dependent students. Acceptable documentation if unable to get one parent's signature. So if the student is a dependent student and does not live at home and possibly lives in another state, or their parents have COVID-19, or the student has COVID-19, whatever the excuse is, if they're unable to get the document signed by one parent, that needs to be documented by whatever they tell you over the phone or however you're going to handle this. And make sure that you keep all that documentation, and the dependent students' verification worksheet or other documents do not have to be signed by that parent. And then you always get an April warning about W verification codes. So some of you use Ws, most of you do not. And that's where you go ahead and process one Pell disbursement without the verification being complete. And then you get a warning that if you don't have the verification, they're going to deobligate that money. Well, they're not going to deobligation money in April because you do get other notifications. I think there's another one in, I want to say May or June, and then another one in July. I mean, there's There's 3 total out there, but this one you're not going to get, and they're not going to deobligate the funds. That gives you a little longer to look at your W codes and go in there and try to collect your verification that's needed. They know that's a very difficult thing right now with the coronavirus out there. Here's some more information that was updated. Cash management. I know they're working on this also. Institutions must comply with the cash management regs unless unable to do so due to the COVID-19 disruptions. So you have to document the reasons why it's unable to comply and retain the documentations for its records. So maybe you're not at the school and you don't have any way to do any of the reporting that's required for cash management. If you're using FAME as a third-party servicer, obviously we're still doing reporting. Your borrower requests for loan cancellations. Again, if you aren't able to process them because you're not at the school. Excess cash, you're not able to return excess cash because you're not at the school. You don't have some availability, which is, I think, a hard one to prove. And notices and authorizations, and exactly which notifications and authorizations they're referring to, I'm not even sure, but it's all part of the cash management. So I know that the notifications to the borrower that this is a loan disbursement. Your notifications that the student's going to give you the right to hold funds. I mean, I don't know which one of these notifications and authorizations they're talking about. So we're still waiting for more information from the Department of Education on that one. Needs analysis. And keep this in mind and document, and remember when you're doing input to FAME not to include it once these students get some money, because any aid in the form of grants or low interest loans received by the victims of an emergency from a federal or state related entity. So this is going to come from a federal entity, this stimulus money to the student, for the purpose of providing financial relief is not counted as income for the calculation of EFC or for estimated financial aid in the packaging. So that's one of the things that's updated, but we don't know how they're handling it. So remember, keep all of your COVID-19 guidance from Ed. Handouts, if any, from any webinars you've done, recordings, FAME's recordings are found on the help desk. Also, they're going to be posted to the COVID-19. We have one up there. The others are in the process of getting posted. Will be there as soon as possible. Written guidance from accrediting agencies and state agencies. Strictly adhere to accrediting and state approvals for temporary distance education. Keep very detailed policies and procedures of what you've done during this particular time frame, why you used it, when it became effective, how long you used it. Do not let this one fall between the cracks. Make sure you stay on top of it. Everything we've talked about today only applies to COVID-19 pandemic issues. And if not to you, if your school currently has not been affected, or all of your students are not affected, remember it's only schools and students that were affected. And document everything you do and why. So before I turn it over to Nicole, I want to talk about the other items that were at the beginning. Number one, I've already had people saying, what about my audits? My first audit question was due on March 31st. And I told them we have had nothing from Department of Ed. And unfortunately, that's another one of those issues Department of Ed is talking about right now, is what about the audits? We have some due in April. We have a few due in May. But I would say about 50% of FAME's clients had a December year end with a June 30th audit due. Auditors are inundated trying to do this stuff online and get information back and forth from schools. Schools are closed and unable to get information to them. I don't know what the Department of Ed is going to do, but I think they're going to have to come back and give us some extensions. That being said, I did not say your audit is not due. Your audit is still due. Appeals for your cohort default rates. I don't know how many people go in and do an appeal based on anything for this first go around. But if you plan on doing appeals, the deadline, I believe, is 4/16. And we're waiting to find out if they're going to give an extension on the cohort default rate appeals. The next one is, if you recall, they did mention in some of the electronic announcements, and if you went to the FSA conference, they talked about something that's now been renamed to the annual student loan acknowledgement, which every single student borrower and every plus borrower was going to have to go in and certify that they understand what their current loan debt was and all of this stuff through this annual student loan acknowledgement. And the first ones, before you could do any loans for the next award year, you had to go ahead and certify this by April 2020. That has now been delayed. So that's one of the things I can give you firm information on. The annual student loan acknowledgement has been postponed until April of 21. So 2021 will be when that one's due. The last one is the 2016 BDRs. So I don't know, with all this that's going on, how many of you remember, but the House and the Senate both voted, and their vote was to repeal the 2019 borrower for defense for repayment, which was scheduled to go into effect 7/1/20. And what they were trying to do was to keep the 2016 BDRs. It got through the vote from both the House and the Senate on March 11th and was supposed to go to the president's desk, where we all were fully under the impression the president was going to veto it when it would hit his desk. Well, apparently it never went to his desk. So that is still being held. So God forbid it could still pop up anytime between now and July 1st, when the 2019 are supposed to go into effect. So that's one of those things we're going to have to wait and watch and see what happens. And again, if it does pop up on the president's desk, it is assumed by every group out there that I'm affiliated with that the president said he would veto it. But we don't know what's happening with that. So that's what we're hoping. And with that, I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Nicole.
Nicole, can you hear us?
Yeah, I finally was able to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes. Let me just
Okay.
make sure you can change the slides. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
Thank you, Nicole. Can you go ahead and move your mouse? Perfect.
Sure.
There, you're changing the slide.
Okay, so how do I? Oh, Sally, I know exactly what you're talking about now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about some freedom best practices that we've put together due to the impact of the COVID-19. We do have some freedom updates that will be coming out shortly. The first one is the Freedom 1.4. This update will turn off the critical stop for the refunds due task that is due to the return to Title IV. The future release will remove the students affected from this refunds due list and create a report. A future freedom update will add COVID-19 as a drop reason. Once added, the school will be able to change the drop reason in the student summary by clicking the edit, then selecting the new status. We strongly suggest that schools create groups called leave of absence and distant learning. This will allow you to then create reports to be able to track these students. The schools will go into the maintenance section under groups and create and save the different groups. I've created just a few at the bottom as examples. One would be COVID-19 distant learning. The other one would be COVID-19 LOA. You can certainly add any additional groups you want to be able to track. Once you've created these groups, you will then go into Edit Student in Freedom under the Program Groups tab and change or update your student into the group that's appropriate. To track distance education hours, we're recommending that the schools call customer service. We can then add a new subject to each program version. The school will be teaching with work units under the subjects. The school will then post their daily hours manually under post attendance as you normally would. Once the week is closed, the school will post total weekly hours under the distance education hours for the week. Here's an example of what customer service will do for you. We'll create again a distance learning subject. And as you can see, I've gone ahead and created 4 weeks. This can certainly be extended. We can add 4, 5, 6 weeks, however many weeks the school will be doing distant learning. The one thing that we also do recommend is at the end of this, once you're back to bricks and mortar, what you do want to do is call customer service again. And what we're going to do is put an end date so that your future students don't have this subject on their progress report. Whoops. This is what their progress report will look like, so that when you print their progress report, or more importantly, the transcripts, it will then show up, which right at this point, we understand most states are recommending this, and accrediting agencies are also wanting these hours specifically posted and tracked separately. I do have one more thing that I'd like to mention. I just found out. We know that it's been very difficult for schools with time clocks in order to post their hours on a daily basis. This is a tedious manual process right now in the software. FAME has been working for the past few weeks to help you with this. We have created a portal for schools to be able to log into and upload a CVS file with the students in and out punches. This file will be then converted into a Freedom time clock file, which will then be able to be imported to the Freedom system. FAME will be sending out an email at the beginning of next week with more details on how to be able to upload this into the portal in order to be able to get this done. Oops. And that's it.
I want to add one thing. I was told yesterday that the other thing we're releasing, I think in the next day or two, is the critical stop. So if you have a return to Title IV.
Right, that's the first thing that I did, Sally.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, no problem.
Okay, Joe, we're ready for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Nicole. So we do have plenty of questions. Our audience has been attentively listening to you both. It looks like our first question is, our VA says that we must terminate and refund our GI Bill students if we are not doing distance ed. Is this still true? We notified all of the closure, but we're working to get distance ed approval. Do we have to terminate these students and restart them?
We don't handle VA, so I can't help you with that. I'm sorry. You might want to, call them and say Department of Ed is giving you a little flexibility, but we have no control over over the VA.
Okay. Thank you. Our next question, distance education in theory cannot be done for 7 hours straight. Can we lower COVID-19 attendance standards to 12 hours a week?
Yes.
Okay. And it looks like our next question is, can we input all of the hours at the end of the closure? Most of the students will not have the ability to stay with it even 3 hours a week. Can they start and stop?
I'm sorry, repeat that, Joe?
It says, can we input all of the hours, I guess the students' hours at the end of the closure? Most of our students will not have the ability to stay or attend even 3 hours a week. Can the students start and then stop? That question is it's not too clear.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, if there's only attending 3 hours a week, that's okay for the rest of a payment period, but come the beginning of the next payment period, they're not going to be eligible for aid. And I'm not sure about putting all the hours in at the end. Nicole, can you?
I'm not quite sure I understood the question either.
Okay.
I think they wanted to know if they could input all of the hours, like when they're ready to close the week, but I'm not sure.
The hours can be edited or input either on a daily basis or when you're ready to close the week. Yes, that's the question.
Thank you, ladies. So here it looks like we have a question about that LOA that you had mentioned previously, Sally. The students were notified about the school closure, but not given the LOA form. I do not have an LOA form online, so I cannot email my students the form. Can the student sign the LOA when they return?
Yes, I think because the school is closing, you can put everybody on an LOA, and it's reopening that those forms could be signed after the fact. And there was something in one of the notices that said you could get the LOA after the fact.
Okay. And it looks like our next question is, what's the email address to notify Ed? Or is there somebody specific that they should contact at Ed to notify of temporary distance education?
You would notify your normal contact person that you go to for eligibility questions and everything else in your region. And I think if you go to, because there are people in each region, but you could go to like where the EAP is, and it'll tell you all of the different contacts.
Okay. And then, do you know which electronic signature apps are approved by the Department of Ed?
I don't think it makes any difference as long as you can reproduce the signature. So like any, like our mobile app, you can use signatures there. The whole thing is you can't just use the school can't use the student's email address and have the student email back saying that they want the leave. These students are not going to have their own format for electronic signatures usually.
Okay. And it looks like, what is the FAME app, and where can our students find this app store to sign the LOA paperwork? So I think Sally had just mentioned the app, and I have the slide up for sales. So please send an email to sales@fameinc.com for more information on the app we have available.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sure. Thank you, Sally. Where can we find the waivers for the community service and America Reads for federal work study?
I think if you go into Ed's website, you will find under there's forms and there's all types of support things in there.
Okay.
So if you go to the campus-based section, the waiver will be in there.
Thank you, Sally.
But I'd hold off till next week and see if we get some guidance from them saying if you actually have to apply for a waiver.
Okay. It looks like our next question is, in order to move funds from federal work study to FSCOG, do we need approval from Ed first?
Not according to the stimulus bill. Stimulus bill says you move everything, but again, we're waiting for Department of Ed to give us some information. I mean, normally to move funds, you have to go ahead and have at least one student already working in federal work study. I don't know if this means nobody has to work in federal work study. I mean, there's too many unknowns with that right now.
Right. Okay. And Sally, does that apply for clock hour school as well, the reductions in the academic year?
I don't believe Department of Ed is ever going to approve a clock hour school to have a reduction in an academic year.
Okay.
Because you're already non-term and you already have the flexibility of the student can take as long as it needs for them to complete. So the academic year is defined, and then it just, however long it takes a student to complete it will continue.
Okay.
Maybe if you're not already using the minimum academic year, you could change your academic year, but it would be such a temporary period. I don't know if it'd be worthwhile.
Okay. Our next question, if the school still has funds to allocate to students, can the school use the remaining funds for new federal work study students?
I believe when I read it, it said the students already had to be working.
Okay.
And I don't know where, if you get new federal work study students, where you're going to put them to work.
Exactly.
You can't just put people on there and pay them.
Thank you for that, Sally. Regarding the professional judgment, if the school's documented, can you perform a PJ on a 1920 FAFSA that has already been packaged and awarded, or are you used only for the 2021 school year?
It's anybody who's currently in school. The FAFSA that, it's currently in school, so you can do it for either one.
Okay, perfect. And then if a student dropped prior to COVID-19 shutdown and had refunds due, but had not reached the 45-day last date to refund, is the 45-day extended? So I guess that's at 45-day from the DOD?
Don't know. That's one of those things we're waiting for Department of Ed to tell us.
Okay.
I mean, I think either we're not going to have to refund at all, or we're going to be held to the 45 days. I don't know.
Okay. So we're waiting for an update from Ed.
Absolutely.
Looks like our next question is, what if the student simply doesn't want to participate in temporary distance education? Is that considered a withdrawal due to COVID-19?
I guess you need to find out, why they don't want to participate.
So it goes back to the student reason.
Yeah, the student reason. And if they have no logical reason for not participating, I'm not sure that they want to attend school. So in that case, I think I'd probably drop them.
Okay. Our next question, how do we document the R2T4 in FAME? If there will be an institutional balance due in most cases, what should we do to balance our account to zero, or does the school keep a balance due?
I'm not sure. I mean, discussion with one of the CPAs basically said they thought that when you did your R2T4 and there was a refund due and you did your institutional refund and then the student still owed you money, that you might be able to apply that to your institutional refund to assist the student. But that's just a conversation I had. I don't have anything to base it on. So again, we're waiting for the department to tell us.
Okay. Have you heard if enrollment reporting has been granted an extension? Our school is due April 15th.
I think, again, if you're not there, you can't do enrollment reporting. So it all depends on whether you're capable of getting it done or not. Whatever you're reporting, I would just report the same as last time if you're able to report, because that's what they're indicating. You know, if you don't know if the students dropped, if you're temporarily closed, if you're doing temporary distance ed and you're not sure what the situation is, that the student statuses would stay the same. Unless you know for sure people have dropped. And even at some point, I think they're going to want to capture who dropped because of COVID-19. So I don't, again, you know, we don't have anything else from the department on that either.
Right.
Don't you love the fact I have no answers?
You know what, Sally? I think
Question.
everyone loves the fact that you're keeping it real and you're giving us real-time information. That's what I think everybody loves.
Thank you.
For the emergency funds for schools where 50% goes to the students, does it matter that the students are on a break due to COVID-19? And will they still get the funds? And has there been any guidance as to how much each student should receive?
Actually, the answer to all of that is no. I have no information. We don't know when the money's coming. We don't know how much you're going to get in particular. We don't know. We do know 50% of what you get does have to go to students. We don't know if it gets divided over the student population, if it has to go to the students that need it the most.
Mm-hmm.
Is the definition of who needs it the most? We don't have any of that stuff. And then based on that letter from Elizabeth Warren and Dick Durbin, we're not even sure if they're going to try to cut us out of the funds.
Oh my goodness. Okay. It looks like our next question is, does this include plus loans? Regarding the R2T4 funds that the school can hold, does that include plus loan funds?
I believe R2T4s are R2T4s and pluses are included in R2T4s. So my off the cuff would be, if we don't have to return the money, would be yes, but. And then the next question would be, you know, what if you do your institutional refund calculation and the student doesn't owe you money and the parent doesn't owe you money? Do you send a check to them? I don't know the answer. I'm assuming that's what you do, but hopefully we'll get this, you know, information really soon.
Okay. Our next question, if the school temporarily ceases operation and does not reopen by the end of the payment period, can the school extend their graduation date and not withdraw the student?
Sure. You're going to eventually get them to graduation. I would even think, this is again just a thought process, that they might even have to do something about the 1.5 time frame.
The maximum time.
For clock hour schools, if those clock hour schools are cut down to 12 and 15 hours a week versus 40 hours a week or 35 hours a week, you know, those schedules are going to have to change. Graduation dates are going to get to be extended by everybody. The one thing I didn't mention is, you know, you don't have to change your loan period. So if your loan period was for 9 months and now it's going to take 20 months only because of COVID-19, you don't have to change those dates.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next question, has Ed indicated when and how they will be releasing funds for the emergency relief?
No. I kind of heard that I don't think it's going to be as timely as they had hoped. You know, the time frame was that hopefully we'd have money in 3 weeks. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'd like to think it's going to, but they have no idea even how they're going to do it.
Okay, for our next question, if the student is dropped due to COVID-19 and leaves a credit on the account due to not having to refund the financial aid, what does the school do with the credit on the account?
Again, I'm assuming that credit's going to belong to the student, just like any credit balance would, but I wouldn't do any of that yet until we get some guidance in case they decide that's going to be cash that we should be using or something. I don't know.
Okay. So it looks like I have a question for Nicole. When will FAME update the system for withdrawals not showing the refunds due on the refunds report?
The update is going to be due in the next 2 to 3 days. We're going to be getting it out early next week. The students will still show up on the report, but it won't go into the critical task.
Okay.
So will still allow you to use the system, even though it's going to go into critical until the next update. And then the next update will then remove those students from the list, as long as they still don't need to do the refunds unless things change with the Department of Ed, like Sally's been saying. And then it'll give you some type of report to show what students have been removed.
I just want to remind you, if you have a student who withdraws and it has nothing to do with COVID-19, I just hate the school, so I don't want to continue. Then remember that refund has to be paid and you're not going to have a reminder.
That is correct. So that is up to the school to maintain that list, to look at that list, to make sure that all those students on the report due are actually terminated due to the COVID-19.
I can't imagine anybody doesn't say that it's not COVID-19 related because it's the excuse, but just a reminder.
I agree.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for that, Sally.
You're welcome.
So it looks like our next question is, this goes back to your notification section, Sally, can we have students sign off on their loan disbursements via text or email confirmation? The school normally has them do it in person, but they can't do that right now.
I would say yes, you just have to be careful about personal identifiable information. If you're going to do it email, I would probably do it in an attachment if they had anything, because it's going to have a student name on it, it's going to have money on it.
Right.
And if you happen to have other things on it that's, could be a problem, be sure you either do it as an attachment, ask the student to send it back as an attachment, password protected.
Okay.
And a text, good time to call sales about the mobile app. You can do all types. You can do anything you need basically through the mobile app as far as getting signatures from the student, documentations to them, etc.
Okay, so it looks like our next question is there any leniency granted by Ed to schools with regard to having to complete the enrollment reporting within 15 days?
We don't know yet. I haven't seen anything yet, but again, I cannot imagine, especially if the school's closed, that there's not going to be some non-compliance reporting mechanism that they'll just cancel for the time being. I just can't imagine them expecting people to function under this pandemic and do everything timely. And again, it would be something I think you could fight very easily without it being a big issue if it came to that.
Okay. Next question is, we had a student drop on March 10th. We did calculate the R2T4 per page 12 with the date of March 5th. Is this the start date to determine the start of the COVID-19 qualifying period?
It's any student who drops after March 5th in this current payment period, regardless of when the payment period started.
Okay.
And so it's basically, for the whole payment period that the student's in.
Okay. Our next question is, I read students have to get a minimum of half of the funds your institution gets on slide 26. At least 50% directly goes to the school is not correct. Did the bottom two bullets get flipped?
I'm not sure what that page says, but 50% goes to school, 100% goes to school, then 50% to the school, 50% to the student.
Okay.
out of all that money, you get a lump sum. And of that lump sum, half belongs to school. The other half has to go to students.
And that's for their cost of living, not tuition. Cost of attendance component.
It says everything. It says books, supplies, technology, room, board. So I think we'll just have to wait and see when we get more direction on what I can use for. But tuition on its own, I'm not sure, but it does say anything to help the students stay in school.
Okay. This question is, do we think that this also applies to citizenship documents collected to resolve C codes? I'm referring to not seeing the original document.
I know what you're referring to.
Okay. Sorry.
It doesn't specifically say that. It only talks about V4, V5, and not about citizenship. So I don't think I can tell you yes. That might be a question that we can send to COVID-19 when we're through with the call. I'll put that question in. It's something else for them to consider.
Okay. Do we need to request the emergency relief funds, and will students that are enrolled in non-Title IV programs qualify?
Well, because they only looked at Pell eligible students, and then only 25% of that money went to non-Pell eligible, I believe they expect this money to go to only Title IV programs, but again, I do not know because they've not told us. And then the other part of that is I heard it could be possible that they'll request us to fill out an application for it. That does not say what the stimulus bill doesn't say that. But I heard it might be a possibility, so I don't know for sure. I mean, the stimulus bill just said it was going to the secretary to disperse the money. It did not say how the secretary was going to do this or anything else.
Okay. So it looks like, and I apologize in case you've already answered this. This question says, every year the school has an April audit for external auditors that report information at Ed. Has this been extended?
Not yet. We're hoping to hear something soon. I'm sure they're going to do something with the audits.
Okay.
As of today, your April audit's due in April. I think you'll have guidance before the end of the month.
Okay.
I'm hoping next week, but I don't know if that'll happen.
And it looks like our last question for today, is there a specific date of withdrawal set to claim a student withdrew due to COVID-19? For example, a student was not in attendance a week or two before you close the school and decides not to attend due to COVID-19, or maybe does not want to do distance ed.
If they withdraw because they don't want to do distance ed, I'm not sure you can say that's COVID-19 per se, because they have the opportunity to do distance ed.
Right.
I guess you can make anything COVID-19 as long as you document it well.
Right.
But if the kid hadn't been there for 2 weeks and you weren't forced to close yet, it sounds to me like they just wanted to stop coming to school. And I would think you wouldn't want to push that one.
Okay.
And I'm really sorry, guys, that I couldn't answer a lot of this, but it's a rolling thing. And we will continue to do these webinars. And as we get information in, we'll continue to get information out to you. We really appreciate you. And I know things are tough. Hang in there. I hope you all get your money really, really, really soon.
Sally, thank you again. And Nicole, thank you. Thank you both for today's presentation. And we just want to thank all the attendees that came out to today's webinar. And like Sally said, just stay tuned. We have more coming down the pike furiously and rapidly. So we're here for you. Just stay in touch with us. Thank
And
you,
everybody
Sally.
stay safe. You're welcome.
Definitely stay safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Have a safe week.
You too, Joe.
Thank you, Sally.